Good morning. Welcome to Ballarat, and thank you for joining us today at this public hearing for the inquiry into the supply of homes in regional Victoria. On behalf of the committee, I want to acknowledge that we meet on the lands of the Wadawurrung people and pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend those respects to any First Nations people who may be joining us today or may be tuning in. We pay our respects to them, their culture and their elders past and present. And I just want to say that Wadawurrung country is where I get to live, and I'm so proud to live on Wadawurrung country. I also extend a welcome to any members of the public and the media who are watching today. And I'm very pleased to be here in Ballarat, exploring how the government can support regional communities to build the houses that they need, and to attract new residents required to remain vibrant and productive, and to ensure existing residents can age in place. I know that Ballarat is a great place to live and work. Expanding the right mix of affordable and diverse housing options is essential to the future of my community. Now I'll just run through some important formalities before we begin our hearing. All evidence taken today will be recorded by Hansard and is protected by parliamentary privilege. This means that you can speak freely without fear of legal action in relation to the evidence you give. However, it is important to remember that parliamentary privilege does not apply to comments made outside the hearing, even if you are restating what you said during the hearing. You will receive a draft transcript of your evidence in the next week or so to check. Corrected transcripts are published on the committee's website and may be quoted from in our final report. Thank you for making the time to meet with the committee today. May I introduce the Deputy Chair, Martin Cameron?
Robert and Dan. Martin Cameron, I'm the member for Maule, so down in the Latrobe Valley, Traralgon, Moe and Maule area.
Jordan Crinelli, the member for Bass, over on the western port side of the state.
Wayne Farnham, member for Narracan. I represent the West Gippsland region.
And joining us online, we have Daniela Di Martino. Would you introduce yourself, please, Daniela?
Hi there, Daniela Di Martino. I'm the member for Monbulk, which covers the Dandenong Ranges and Foothills.
Thank you. Can you please state your full names and titles before we begin?
My name's Robert Pradolin, Executive Director of Housing All Australians and former property developer.
Fantastic. Thank you for being here today.
I'm Dan McKenna, CEO of Housing All Australians.
Excellent. Now, we're really looking forward to having a chat with you about the role that you play and being given the opportunity to answer questions. Now, we thank you for the submission that you've put in, and we're going to not do opening statements today. I'm just wondering if, Daniela, because you are online, whether there's anything that you'd like to kick off with in terms of a question.
I'll unmute myself because I'm coughing quite a bit in the background. You really don't need that at high volume on your end. So apologies for that. Look, I'd like to start just by asking how developed is is the PRADS model at this point in time? How long has it been in effect? How developed do you see it?
So yeah, we've been engaging a whole lot of different stakeholders for the last couple of years, probably. We're working with PEXA as the key driver behind actually building out this register, and we've talked to local governments, state governments. We're talking to the federal government at the moment. There's a lot of enthusiasm and support behind building this out. We've been talking to state government of Tasmania. So yeah, I think people fully understand the need for this and how this can actually break open the focus on the CHP industry as the sole solution to the housing crisis. And I think for us, it's even more heightened in regional areas where there isn't so much of a presence for CHPs, and there is real estate agents and there is investment, and it's I guess trying to pull that all together to do it across the country.
Yeah, and maybe if I could provide a bit more granularity to it. I'm a former property developer. When I was running Fraser's, and I've been, for my whole career's been in property, we used NRAS, and I'm sure you've come across that term before. And we used it to sell property to the market. But we had to do it on one condition, because we had to mitigate sales risk. And whether we like it or not, there is a perception of this. So we had to be the property manager. And we managed NRAS very, very successfully. So the PRADS model is based on the NRAS governance structure. But it was very clinical, analogue, it was really clumsy, assume that governance structure fully digitalised with the register. And what that allows a developer to do is that if we negotiate with councils, because again, the term that we're now using is compassionate capitalism. We still care about community even though we run in a capitalist society. It doesn't mean we don't care. So let's work collaboratively. If you give additional density to a development that's over the feasibility, that adds additional value to the land. That additional value then becomes the subsidy. That gets locked into how many affordable homes you want to try and deliver based on that subsidy. We lock it in with a restrictive covenant. We can sell it to someone in Timbuktu, and you'll always be monitored to ensure that those obligations that were established are there for the life of that commitment. You've just unlocked private sector investment for affordable housing for key workers. You asked the question, and Dan's part answered it. I've been having very deep discussion with the federal government, and before the election result, they confirmed with me that I can say we've been in great discussions with the Federal Treasurer's Office, the Federal Housing Minister's Office. They warmly embrace the register and they wish to discuss it, continue discussing with us should they get elected. Now we know the result. We're just waiting for the portfolios to be issued, and hopefully that's the same minister so we can continue those discussions. So I think we're at a very close tipping point. We had an article in The Age just a couple of days ago on page 3. I think it's going to end up happening next year, but it must be in collaboration. And, you know, Dan mentioned regional Victoria, and this is regional Australia. Community housing providers are the salt of the earth, but this issue is so big, we cannot rely on a niche market. You may or may not know that there was a report done by the federal government in 2021 during the Morrison government, quantified the shortfall of social and affordable housing across the country is $290 billion over the next 20 years. That's 44,500 homes built every year for 20 years. HAF is aspiring to build 11,000 homes for the next 5 years. Where's the other 33,000 going to come from? We've allowed homelessness, which is the canary in the coal mine, to a much bigger issue of the housing continuum, to become normalised. If we do not fix affordable housing at the key worker end, homelessness is going to continue to increase. That will have economic impacts as well as social impacts. And the concern as a father is in 30 years' time it'll be unsafe walking down the street because of the desperation within society. So as a former property developer, as a proud, compassionate capitalist, this is something that, and we said this the other day to the inquiry on planning, and if I can reference that a little bit, and we're agnostic politically, so I don't even know which side either of you are on. But what the Liberal Party was saying during that inquiry, I heard the Labor Party say exactly the same words 11 years earlier. Why do you have to wait 11 years to learn again and realise the desperation? This has to be bipartisan. We have to be look into the future and say, unless we solve this fundamental piece of infrastructure, we are not leaving our grandchildren with a society that we want them to have. And yes, you can argue about the essence of it, but the fundamental principle we have to both agree, because otherwise we'll never solve this problem.
Thank you for that answer. Deputy Chair, would you like to ask a question?
Just elaborating on that a little bit, Robert. Obviously, you're talking to the federal government, you're talking to regional Victorians. Is it the same right around regional Australia, or are there different pockets? Who's in front? Who's leading the pack? Who's doing it the best? Or are we all at that same level and at that tipping point?
We are all at that same level. We are still sitting inside the box. Everyone's affordable housing strategy is very, very similar. We talk about supply, yes, all that stuff's important, but we need to push ourselves outside the box a bit to try a little bit different solutions. Some of these things have been brought to home are Tourism Southeast, which represents the tourism industry in the Alpine regions. They did a survey for looking for key workers. And the survey resulted in something that I thought was extraordinary. And this is really a trend that's been developing. To attract key workers in alpine areas, and I think this applies across the whole country, 91% of the survey respondents said they'll take a job if it comes with a house.
Yep.
Otherwise, they're not going to come. Now, these things take a long lead times to get to that position. It's going to take a long lead time to come out. There is no short-term fix. One of the things that we are advocating for as a separate part of the policy, which is across the country, is while we build these houses our country needs, there are so many empty buildings that are sitting waiting for the next development life. We should use them as short-term shelter while we build the houses our country needs. And now we're doing this across the country. We started off in WA. We've done about 5 projects in Victoria with Mirvac, Metricon, Henley. We're now doing it in Queensland with Queensland Rail. They've got empty houses there during a housing crisis. We're now refurbishing them for Churches of Christ. We've done it in Tasmania. We're now doing it in New South Wales, all through compassionate capitalism. Now, we will never solve this problem as a pro bono exercise, but it shows that the private sector cares. This issue is so big, this is not an issue for government to solve alone. This is a community problem, and that includes business. So, yes, this is across the country, and I don't see a short-term solution, so let's not pretend there's one. Let's get together and work out a long-term solution on behalf of our grandchildren.
Wayne, did you have a question?
Sure. Thank you for coming in today. How's the response been from local government at a local government level? Because just through our journey on this inquiry, we've heard some councils are good, some councils are bad. How are you finding local councils at the moment?
I have a view, and I've been doing this for a long time, and obviously we've now got Dan as a CEO, so I'm trying to sort of hand over. But when I've got the view that Australians, when they actually understand the issue and they are brought along the journey, they actually understand it. And I recall a presentation I did to a group of councils in the southeast of Melbourne, and I actually sat down and explained how the developers process actually works and the time it takes. And I recall this distinct moment when a council said, "Oh, the pennies just dropped. I didn't understand that." Yet we're making decisions based on our conditioning, our background, etc., etc. Everyone lives in a house, or generally, but so they think they're an expert in housing. It's a very complicated ecosystem that unless you get the right levers, it gets confusing. But getting back to your question, the Municipal Association of Victoria support the model and the register. And we are still in discussion. We met with them maybe 2 months ago just to bring up to speed. So look, I think it's a matter of bringing people on the journey with us. And generally, I think people understand that this is not an issue for us, it's an issue for our grandkids. So what are we going to do about it? Collaboration. So the councils that we've been talking to were very responsive once they've actually brought on that journey. Our task is to share that information.
Can I just follow up? We've got 3 councils coming in this afternoon. We were with Castlemaine yesterday and we were with Horsham on Monday. What type of questions should we be asking of our local councils as a committee? Is there questions that you could help us in terms of...
Funny you should ask that, because we're working with Macedon Council. I live in Macedon, and we've been working with them, going through the general issues. There's businesses in Macedon that have actually had to buy apartments for their workers to actually reside in so they can actually service community.
And we've heard that in Ararat as well.
Well, you know, the Dalesford Cafe bought the old aged care facility there to house workers. Yep. Sorrento Hotel had to buy an aged care facility to build low-cost accommodation for workers. This is a business problem. So in terms of Macedon, you can ask Rob Ball, because I asked him the other day, I said, look, we're appearing in the same hearing. Can we say that we are talking together? He said, yes, we are in discussions. Because we think every local government area should understand its business and the economic needs of that business and the income profile that they need to attract workers. Because using technology, every local government area can have an income band specific to the workforce needs that it needs. We don't need to have 2 income bands, one for the cities and one for region, specific. But you need to understand the demographics and all the data. It is all about data. And the lack of data across the country in this area is really appalling, which is another reason why the federal government's interested in starting something, because it starts to capture that data. And we are doing this in the national interest, because we have to step outside the box. So the question is, tell me about your future work with Housing All Australians and the Register. What are the, I can't recall, Lenka Thompson, who is involved with Macedon Rangers, but she's here for one of the other councillors. I've given a bit of a heads up, so you can ask her as well. It's a matter of collaboration. And I think, Dan, you may have a view here because I don't want to hog the microphone like usual, but it is all about collaboration and learning together and doing this journey together. That's the key part of it, I think. Do you want to add something, Dan?
No. I think Rob's been doing this a bit longer than I, so it has a bit more context. But yeah, I come from a property development background as well. I've delivered projects in Ballarat, understand the differing needs between the regions and cities, and also painting the brush of regional Australia and regional Victoria. It is very, very different, and there's very, very different needs. So that's what's exciting for us, is the specificity that we can build into the technology, that different councils have different needs and different industries are in different parts of the world, and dairy industries and things like that have different needs at different times. So I think that's probably our biggest message of the power of building this in such a way that it can continue to grow and service what we all understand we need to do.
And just, you prompted me something that you may or may not be aware of. Have you heard of the Gardner Foundation?
No, I don't know.
They look after the dairy industry.
Right.
They've only just recently gone out with an expression of interest for innovation around providing key worker housing for the entire dairy industry in Victoria, because they can't get workers without a house. That's only just gone out the last couple of weeks. And again, sometimes all these initiatives are done sort of in a sort of separate silo, and sometimes you need to actually bring them together and say, how do you collaborate? The state government's involved, but just because the state government's involved doesn't mean you know about it, because the state government's quite big. But this is a collective problem that's taken them outside and saying, we have to do something for our dairy industry, otherwise we're going to be stuffed. And you can put that across every industry.
Excellent. Jordan.
Just further on from the council, and thank you so much for coming along today. I'm keen on the feedback that the model has with financial institutions as well, and potentially also sort of the superannuation industry coming into the fold.
I'll let Dan start that, and then I'll fill in the background.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, we've engaged heavily with the banking industry as well to bring them on the journey to help them understand this and get buy-in, because I think we, as Rob was alluding to, we understand that this isn't something government can solve financially. It's just too big a scale, so we need them to understand that. And then turning to the mum-dad investors or more institutional investors, building it in such a way that, there is still that self-interest for people to want to invest in the model. We can't just expect goodwill and good intentions to get us out of this. I think we need to frame it in such a way that it is still a good investment for people to back, whilst there is still social good coming out of it. So yeah, I think that's probably the feedback that we've been trying to pull and build out.
And get into more specifics, you would have seen a letter from Commonwealth Bank in that pack. They support the register. We've had discussion with National Australia Bank, and we've also had recent discussion with Bendigo and Adelaide Bank Private, which is the franchise of Bendigo and Adelaide Bank. They are financially supporting us to actually pursue our mission, and it's all about getting the banking system in a situation where they support these sort of initiatives at new asset class. We also had a meeting with Anna Bligh on behalf of the Australian Banking Association. We are now coming back to her because she wants us to present to the broader banking group. Again, key stakeholder. Unless you get all the key stakeholders aligned, get them to understand what we're trying to do, mitigate their risks, then you get everyone on board. This is why it's taken a long time to get all the stakeholders that you've probably seen in those letters. It takes a long time to bring people on the journey. And we've got broad industry support, as you would have seen. National Shelter's also on board of the principle, because this is a collective problem.
And are there examples of similar, PRADS models developments in the world, outside of
From what
Australia?
PEXA tell us, this is a global first, so how about we get out and try and do something, eh? So, yeah, they said that they don't think there's anything like this around from their investigations.
Yeah.
Can I ask what both of your opinions are on sort of more mandated inclusionary zoning? Because obviously you're talking about good faith negotiations, and you obviously hope that developers of all kinds will be operating in good faith in that way, but that's not always the case, as we know. The Victorian government explored inclusionary zoning in the past and it was knocked back. What are both of your thoughts on, is that possibly something that may work in rural and regional areas to really bake it in to development?
I'll let Dan come after me on this one here because I was involved in those discussions 13 years ago. And as a principle, and some of my industry members may disagree with me, is I support the principle of inclusionary zoning, but you need to do it where it actually gets the value uplift, not further down the track, otherwise prices go up. And just that last 13 years ago when it was discussed, when I think the Braxton-Brumby government would come in, I was one of the developers around the table and they said, we're going to bring in inclusionary zoning. And the usual fist banging on the table. Half an hour after that, I said, stop. What happens if the government said they'll introduce inclusionary zoning today, but it will not take effect until 10 years from today? Who's going to object? Not one, because they hadn't bought it yet. It needs to come off the farm value and stay in the local government area that granted the rezoning. The windfall gains tax in principle makes sense based on that premise I've just discussed. One major flaw: it goes into consolidated revenue. It must stay in the local government area that's granted that rezoning. And if you were a council on that council, why would you rezone a piece of land to help the housing crisis when all the developers are going to say, I'll provide you a school or a road? Now it goes in consolidated revenue. Sorry, I can't do any of that. Understand where the money flows or where it needs to be held. So I support it, but give the industry time to buy it and factor into what they purchase, otherwise upward pressure on price. Do you want to add some more?
Yeah, no, I agree with Rob's sentiment. I think in my experience, prior to this role, I was the CEO of Nightingale Housing, and so we did Nightingale Ballarat out here.
We were there yesterday.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, great. I should go and say hi.
Joe's coming in later today.
Yes, yeah, I texted him when I was here. But yeah, so we imposed on ourselves a 20% inclusionary zoning, 20% CHP allocation that, we started that 2015, 2016, and we wanted to show what was possible. And we did that in Nightingale Ballarat. But as economic conditions have changed, sort of 21, 22, 23, it became more and more impossible to make that stack up because essentially the 80% to market sales were cross-subsidising the 20%. That was it. There was no government involvement other than the operational costs through the housing providers. And so it was more and more difficult to justify that, with the 80% just pushing that up and up and up. So I think if there's time for the whole industry to respond to that, but yeah, my lived experience is, it just pushes up everybody else's prices to justify that.
Thank you.
Drawing on the experience you've had over many decades or more recently, what advice do you have for the Victorian government? Like what initiatives, what are the priority initiatives that you'd really like to see in place in the short term to solve this long-term problem?
Okay, I'm going to put my little bit of a wish list.
Yes, please do.
And I think part of being a developer, you have to read the market. So my read the market here is Australians, not only Victorians, are looking for what I call true leadership in this area. The first thing is encourage the opposition, whoever that opposition is, to come in and talk together about the long-term issues that we're facing and realise it's a long-term problem to solve. If the register's got merit, like as Dan said, he's in discussion with Tasmania, and the reason why Dan is because I'm on the board of Homes Tasmania, so I've got to stay one step removed. But we're about to discuss this with a whole range of state governments. Come on board and support the register's development. In my discussion with the federal government, they say, yes, we like the register, but where are the states in this? Because they're the ones with planning powers. And this is why you don't want to make it a chicken and egg. You want to make it a collective solution. And if we think it has merits, it means everyone has to play their part collectively. And part of the reason for one national register is that the industry wants one set of rules across the country. Let's not pretend like politics does, is that if Queensland does this, we're going to do it better in Victoria. Why don't we do it, say, as a country? Let's demonstrate what we can do to the world instead and collectively do it. And start supporting it. And now, that is not, in itself is not a solution. But as every government's finding, funding's a problem. How do you unlock it? And the mum and dad investor that could be unlocked through this, as well as the super funds, because it's, again, two different classes, is a very important source of funding. My hope, if you think of it, let's assume the register's available and it actually works, because I think Australians are very generous when it comes to helping others. You go one step lower and fractionalise the ownership of key worker housing across the country. I think people will start donating to make these things happen. Then it becomes a collective spirit. And I'll touch on the election that we've just had, and the thing that stuck in my mind is how civil both leaders were, how respectful they were, and that, to me, ingrains our values of compassion on both sides of politics. Use it to do something good for our grandkids is what I keep on referring back to. So step outside the comfort zone, and if an idea is worthy of exploration, don't die wondering. Because as I said we had a strategy day yesterday, and as I said to the group, you need to push people slightly outside their comfort zone and make them feel slightly uncomfortable. Because if you're not uncomfortable, nothing ever changes.
Did you want to add anything to that, Dan?
I don't think I can top that.
Daniela, is there anything, we've got the last couple of minutes left, is there anything that you'd really like to ask or?
No, that's been, I actually wanted to say thank you for coming in, because I launched straight into my question beforehand without doing so. That's been incredibly enlightening, I've got to say. Look, it's great listening to you. So if there's something you'd like to add, but I don't know if I've got a question which could flesh out more than you've already contributed, to be quite honest. It's, there's a lot of food for thought. So thank you very much.
Terrific. MPs in the room?
Yeah.
Anything further?
Yeah, just in closing, it's interesting, on this inquiry we've heard a lot about windfall gains tax. We've heard a lot of developers and people say it is such a negative to unlock development. But you've taken a different approach, which is you're probably the first person that actually said yay to windfall gains tax, because when we talk about affordability, we know that tax will get passed on down the line. So I was just actually really wondering why you have a different approach pretty well to anyone else we've heard.
As I said some people in my industry won't like what I'm saying, but we need to look at it as a bigger picture. And maybe just to explain a little bit of the process. You've got the farmland, then you start to talk about rezoning it, speculators start to come in and take gambles as to which property, and all of a sudden you've got a property that's worth a lot more than what it's actually worth as farmland. As a former developer, we never wanted to take the risk on speculation. So we always bordered subject to off a speculator, and be careful, speculators are not true developers like an Australand or Mirvac, they're manufacturers. So we buy it subject to it being rezoned. But the pure speculator adds no value. So if someone's looking at rezoning something, you need to say it up front, we're looking at rezoning these lands like Dan's discussing with Tasmania. And when we do rezone, wherever we're rezoning, we're going to capture value capture, not tax. Different semantics. Half of the value uplift on behalf of the community for affordable housing, not to go into consolidated revenue. And over a period of time, because again, this will not solve it straight away. This is a long-term effect. If they would have listened to my discussion 13 years ago, where no developer actually objected on the table, we would have had windfall gain tax. The unfortunate part about politics, I want it in my term. That doesn't help the future. And if I can just leave with one little point, because I presented some of these things to the homeless inquiry in both Victoria, which Fiona Patton chaired, and the federal government homeless inquiry that Andrew Wallace chaired for the Nationals. And maybe I was a little bit arrogant at the time, but I think it still reflects the reality. I said, as well-meaning as you are on the other side of the table, I said to them at the time, I don't think anything will be implemented from your report. It'll just be another group of people wanting to say their things and then nothing actually happens. And that report is still gathering dust. So my only last conclusion is make sure that shit happens out of what you recommend in the interest of all of us.
Hear. What an important way to end our first witnesses in Ballarat. So thank you very much to Robert and to Dan for making the time to participate in this inquiry. I think you've really added value and got the day off to a great start. If you'd like to provide any additional information or responses to questions or expand on anything, please speak to our Secretariat. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.